All right, today I'm going to be talking about sexual abuse in the Catholic Church and kind of using that as a case study in crisis communication. And I know these are words you might not understand, but we'll get into it in the presentation. So, kind of to get started, crisis communication is basically the various communication processes that an organization puts out and goes through to respond to a crisis, to kind of manage the public's response to a crisis, to manage response to the crisis within the organization, to kind of keep a crisis under control. And so an organizational crisis can basically be defined as anything that affects the operation of an organization. And this can be in or out of an organization's control. It can be like a global pandemic or a natural disaster that might affect how an organization operates. Or it might be kind of like a scandal within the organization, maybe like a sexual harassment scandal, which we will get into, or maybe like a finance scandal. It can really be anything. So crisis communication, I kind of touched on this in the last slide, but it's important because crises are always happening in today's world. Like think about it, in the last year alone, UL Lafayette has dealt with 2 hurricanes, a snowstorm, a pandemic, and internal revenue issues. They kind of had to tell different departments to cut their spending a little bit. These are all various crises that UL Lafayette has had to put out communications about and kind of manage how they are working in response to these crises and how new policies they have for the public in response to these crises. And crisis communication can really manage how the public responds to an organization after a crisis. So in 1982, Johnson and Johnson famously handled these Tylenol murders in Chicago really well. Um, Tylenol tablets in the Chicago area were found to have been tampered by somebody and laced with cyanide, and it killed, I think, like 7 people. But Johnson and Johnson responded to it so well that within a year they were recovered from the crisis, and their share of the market had gone back to its normal amount. So, kind of using the Catholic Church as a case study, kind of understanding crisis communication better, we can use the Catholic Church to kind of get an example of what bad communication, crisis communication is. Since abuse first came out in the church in the 1980s, the Catholic Church has done a really poor job of handling the crisis and effectively and honestly communicating about the scandal. So much that it was actually the subject of a 2015 movie, Spotlight, which some of you may have seen. So kind of looking at the history of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. In the late 1980s, Gilbert Goth, who was a priest right here in Lafayette, was found guilty of molesting over 100 young boys. And since this case, so many more cases have come up around the country. And in 2002, the Boston Globe actually issued a series of articles about the abuse of children by priests in the area. Um, and it won a Pulitzer Prize for its reporting. And this was kind of the moment that really put the issue into the public eye. So, kind of looking at the church's early response to this scandal, it was not very open or clear. So, in the late 1980s, 2 church officials in Louisiana published this internal document, kind of about how the church should respond to this matter and how how individual priests should respond to this matter. And if we read some of these quotes, we can see that it was kind of being sketchy. So, page 4, it is requested that each reader return the document to the person from whom they received same without copying. Page 39. It is important to know what matter should be contained in a priest personnel file, considering the very probable discoverability of these files. So instead of kind of opening up and being honest about sexual abuse that was happening in the church, these church officials encouraged people to kind of keep it hush hush, keep it secret, and even keep their response to it secret. They did not want anybody finding out about it. And kind of looking at pages 77 and 78, the public church must be made to understand that the church authorities could not have done anything to prevent this incident in cases where this assertion is true. So the church was very much trying to avoid responsibility for this sexual assault, which was kind of unlike kind of like how we saw with Johnson and Johnson owning up to these murders and really helping out the police department and the FBI to kind of solve these murders, the church was very like they didn't want to accept responsibility. And so in 2002, they released a more detailed um, charter for the protection of young children, and this was released by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And this was largely in response to the Boston Globe articles, which really put the issue into public attention. But even still, they were kind of not wanting to own up to their mistakes and own up to the history that goes back to the 1980s. For example, on page 3, it says, since 2002, the church in the United States has experienced a crisis without precedent in our times. This is kind of not acknowledging that sexual abuse has been going on way before 2002. They were just caught in 2002, and that's why they're saying it's a crisis happening in 2002. But the crisis actually goes back way back to the 1980s, and we see this kind of culture of not owning up to mistakes in this document, specifically in this line. And kind of still, page 23, during the investigation, the accused enjoys the presumption of innocence, and all appropriate steps shall be taken to protect his reputation. So the church in this case is not really communicating to try and make amends to those abused. It's still trying to protect its image and the image of its priests as much as possible. So kind of looking at the effects of this scandal. In 2019, the Pew Research Center released a report on public opinion of the Catholic Church. And it said that 27% of U.S. Catholics reported going to Mass less often, and 26% of these Catholics reported a deduction in their donations to their parish or diocese. So we see here like there is a direct effect on this scandal on the activity of the church and those who participated in the activity of the church. There is a reduction in those wanting to affiliate themselves with the church. And 48% of all US adults actually said that they felt that sexual abuse was more common among Catholic priests and bishops than it was among leaders of other religions and denominations. So here we see that public trust in the Catholic Church is very much lost as a result of this scandal, and specifically the Catholic Church's poor response to this scandal. So kind of using this scandal to build some guidelines about crisis communication, I think is would be very effective. So kind of number one, if there is something to be discovered, it will be discovered. The church wanted to kind of keep it hush hush, and in 2002, a newspaper came along and published all about it, and now we all know about it. Number two, take full responsibility for anything within your control and even some things out of your control. This can kind of be done to maintain the trust of the public and kind of avoid people from having a bad image of you. Even if you might not be wrong, saying that you are wrong and apologizing will really help pull people in and gain their trust. Number three, act quickly. Don't wait for issues to compound. This scandal has been going on since 1980, but we're still hearing about it because the church did not act quickly. And number four, a scandal can affect your reputation for years. Like we saw, this scandal has been going on since 1980. These major reports by the Boston Globe were put out in 2002, but even in 2019, people were still lacking trust in the church. And these guidelines can kind of apply at any level. They can apply at a organizational level, but they can also apply at a personal level, kind of teaching you how you should respond in your personal life to various issues and mistakes that you make. So here's some more sources if you're interested in reading more, some of the websites, articles, and books that I used. And I hope you enjoyed my presentation.